All right, everybody. So we are going to go ahead and get started reading chapters 1 and 2. So I want you guys to know that sometimes I will be making videos where I'm present so that way you can see me. But for the sake of time today, I wanted to get through chapters 1 and 2 together and just have it all on one screencast, okay? Because in order for us to finish the book by the end of the school year, we will have to double up only today and do 2 chapters, okay? So you can either be following along on my screen right now, or if you have a copy of the book, or if you wanted to open it up in your own tab, or simply just listen, that's fine as well. Okay, so The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, a story for children, C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis is our author. And if we scroll down, we see that we have a table of contents. So it goes through all of the chapters and tells us the names of them, okay? So we do have 17 chapters that we will get through. So chapter 1 is where we're going to start. So when we read Stormbreaker, we often talked about the title of every chapter and made some kind of guess as to what could be happening in that chapter. So I want you guys to be thinking about that. Okay, so for chapter 1, please make sure that you guys have looked, and chapter 2, please make sure that you've looked over the vocabulary or have that available just in case you had any questions on any of the words. So chapter 1 is called Lucy Looks into a Wardrobe. Once there were 4 children, whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. So we know that that's part of our conflict that we have as to why these kids had to leave their home. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, Betty, but they do not come into the story much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair, which grew over most of his face as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. So there's a perfect example of characterization, okay? The author's describing the character. But on the first evening when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they had said good night to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. "We've fallen on our feet, no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid. The old chap will let us do anything we like." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Oh, come off it," said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. "Don't go on talking like that." Again, if we think about characterization, I want you guys to think about the way that Edmund is acting, the things that he's saying to help you, kind of come up with an opinion of him. "Like what?" said Susan. "And anyway, it's time you were in bed." "Trying to talk like mother," said Edmund. "And who are you to say when I'm to go to bed? Go to bed yourself." "Hadn't we all better go to bed?" said Lucy. "There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking." So saying that they could get in trouble. "No, there won't be," said Peter. "I'll tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes' walk from here to the dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between." "What's that noise?" said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and thought of all of those long passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. "It's only a bird, silly," said Edmund. "It's an owl," said Peter. "This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And the woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags," which is another word for deer. "There'll be hawks." "Badgers," said Lucy. "Foxes," said Edmund. "Rabbits," said Susan. But when next morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out over the window, you could see neither the mountains nor the woods, nor even the stream in the garden. "Of course it would be raining," said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor and went upstairs in the room he had set apart for them. A long, low room with 2 windows looking out in one direction and 2 in another. Do stop grumbling, Ed, said Susan. 10 to 1 it'll clear up in an hour or so. And in the meantime, we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and lots of books. Not for me, said Peter. I'm going to explore in the house. Everyone agreed to this, and that is how the adventures began. It was the sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only to spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected they would. But soon they came to a very long room full of pictures, and there they found a suit of armor, and after that was a room all hung with green, with a harp in one corner, and then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then a kind of little upstairs hall and a door that led out onto a balcony, and then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined with books, most of them very old books, and some bigger than a Bible in a church. And shortly after that, they looked into a room that was quite empty, except for one big wardrobe, the sort that has a looking glass in the door. So if we were to stop and talk about that real quick, a wardrobe is just another name for a dresser, and a looking glass. Okay, think about that for a second. You look into a glass, something that's glass. It's just another way to say mirror. There was nothing else in the room at all except a dead blue bottle on a windowsill. Nothing there, said Peter, and they all trooped out again, all except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure that it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Now, mothballs are they're just like little balls, and people put them in things to keep the moths away, because sometimes moths will munch on your stuff. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it is very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. Soon she went further in and found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as not to bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further in, then 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel woodwork against the tips of her fingers, but she could not feel it. This must be a simply enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of coats aside to make room for her. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder, is that more mothballs? She thought, stooping down to feel it with her hand. But instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. This is very queer, she said, and went on a step or 2 further. Next moment, she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. Why, it is just like branches of trees, exclaimed Lucy, and then she saw that there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away, where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later, she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at nighttime with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it is a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. I can always get back if anything goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow and through the wood towards the other light. In about 10 minutes, she reached it and found it was a lamppost. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamppost in the middle of a wood, and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming toward her. And soon after that, a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upward, he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet, he had goat's hooves. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice this at first because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler, which is another name for scarf, round his neck, and skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face with a short pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck two horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held an umbrella. In the other arm he carried several brown paper parcels or bags. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn, and when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all of his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. All right, so we do have, some of those fantasy elements already in chapter 1. All right, chapter 2 is called What Lucy Found There. All right, so we got to be thinking about that chapter title. "Good evening," said Lucy, but the fawn was so busy picking up its parcels that at first it did not reply. When it had finished, it made her a little bow. Good evening," said the fawn. "Excuse me, I don't want to be inquisitive, but should I be right in thinking that you are a daughter of Eve?" So we need to talk about that just for a second. So, daughter of Eve. So when we think of the Bible, we have God created Adam and Eve to be the first humans. So when he says daughter of Eve, he's referring to her being a female human, okay? "My name's Lucy," said she, not quite understanding him. "But you are, forgive me, you are what they call a girl?" asked the fawn. "Of course I'm a girl," said Lucy. "You are, in fact, human?" "Of course I'm human," said Lucy, still a little puzzled. To be sure, said the fawn. "How stupid of me, but I've never seen a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve before. I am delighted. That is to say," and then it stopped as if it had been going to say something it had not intended, but had remembered in time. Delighted, it went on. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tumnus." "I'm very pleased to meet you, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy. "And may I ask, O Lucy, daughter of Eve," said Mr. Tumnus, "how have you come into Narnia?" "Narnia? What's that?" said Lucy. "This is the land of Narnia," said the fawn, "where we are now. All that lies between the lampposts and the great castle of Cair Paravel on the eastern sea. And you have come from the wild woods of the west? All right, so there we have our setting." I got it through the wardrobe in the spare room," said Lucy. "Ah," said Mr. Tumnus in a rather melancholy voice. "If only I had worked harder at geography when I was a little fawn, I should no doubt know all about those strange countries. It is too late now." "They aren't countries at all," said Lucy, almost laughing. "It's only just back there, at least. I'm not sure. It is summer there." "Meanwhile," said Mr. Tumnus, "it is winter in Narnia and has been for ever so long, and we shall both catch a cold if we stand here talking in the snow." So that gives us that when piece of our setting. "Daughter of Eve from the far land of Spare where eternal summer reigns around the bright city of Wardrobe. How could it be if you came and had tea with me?" "Thank you very much, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy, "but I was wondering whether I ought to be getting back." "It's only around the corner," said the fawn, "and there'll be a roaring fire and toast and sardines and cake." "Well, it's very kind of you," said Lucy, "but I shan't be able to stay long." "If you would take my arm, daughter of Eve," said Mr. Tumnus, "I should be able to hold the umbrella over both of us. That's the way. Now off we go." And so Lucy found herself walking through the wood, arm in arm with this strange creature, as if they had known each other all their lives. They had not gone far before they came to a place where the ground became rough and there were rocks all about, the little hills up and the little hills down. At the bottom of one small valley, Mr. Tumnus turned suddenly aside as if he were going to walk straight into an unusually large rock. But at the last moment, Lucy found that he was leading her into the entrance of a cave. As soon as they went inside, she found herself blinking in the light of a wood fire. Then Mr. Tumnus stooped and took a flaming piece of wood out of the fire with a neat little pair of tongs and lit a lamp. Now, we shan't be long, he said, and immediately put a kettle on. So now we have a little bit more of the setting, okay? We're at Tumnus's house. Lucy thought she had never been in a nicer place. It was a little dry, clean cave of reddish stone with a carpet on the floor and two little chairs. One for me and one for a friend, said Mr. Tumnus, and a table and a dresser and a mantelpiece over the fire, and above that a picture of an old faun with a gray beard. In one corner there was a door which Lucy thought must lead to Mr. Tumnus's bedroom, and on one wall was a shelf full of books. Lucy looked at those while he was setting out the tea things. They had titles like The Life and Letters of Silenus, or Nymphs and Their Ways, or Men, Monks, and Gamekeepers, A Study in Popular Legend, or Is Man a Myth? Now, daughter of Eve, said the faun. And really, it was wonderful tea. There was a nice brown egg lightly boiled for each of them, and then sardines on toast, and then buttered toast, and then toast with honey, and then a sugar-topped cake. And when Lucy was tired of eating, the faun began to talk. He had wonderful tales to tell of the life in the forest. He told about the midnight dances and how the nymphs who lived in the wells and the dryads who lived in the trees came out to dance with the fauns, about long hunting parties after the milk-white stag who could give you wishes if you caught him. So the milk-white stag, so we have a white deer that could give you wishes. After feasting and treasure-seeking with the wild red dwarves in deep mines and caverns far below the forest floor, and then about summer when the woods were green and old Silenus on his fat donkey would come to visit them, and sometimes Bacchus himself, and then the streams would run with wine instead of water, and the whole forest would give itself up to jollification for weeks on end. Not that it isn't always winter now, he added gloomily. Then to cheer himself up, he took out from his case on the dresser a strange little flute that looked as if it were made of straw and began to play. And the tune he played made Lucy want to cry and laugh and dance and go to sleep all at the same time. It must have been hours later when she shook herself and said, "Oh, Mr. Tumnus, I'm so sorry to stop you, and I do love that tune, but really I must go home. I only meant to stay for a few minutes." Now we have our conflict, okay? We have the problem that Lucy wanted to get back. "It's no good now," said the faun, laying down his flute and shaking his head to her sorrowfully. "No good?" said Lucy, jumping up and feeling rather frightened. "What do you mean? I've got to go home at once. The others will be wondering what happened to me." But a moment later she asked, "Mr. Tumnus, whatever is the matter?" For the faun's brown eyes had filled with tears, and then the tears began trickling down his cheeks, and soon they were running off the end of his nose, and at last it covered its face with its hands and began to howl. Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy in great distress. Don't. What is the matter? Aren't you well? Dear Mr. Tumnus, do tell me what's wrong." But the faun continued sobbing as if its heart would break. And even when Lucy went over and put her arms around him and lent him her handkerchief, he did not stop. He merely looked at the handkerchief and kept on using it, wringing it out with both hands whenever it got too wet to be any more use, so that presently Lucy was standing in the damp patch. "Mr. Tumnus," bawled Lucy in his ear, shaking him, "do stop it at once. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. A great big faun like you. What on earth are you crying about?" Oh, sobbed Mr. Tumnus. "I'm crying because I'm such a bad faun." "I don't think you're a bad faun at all," said Lucy. "I think you're a very good faun. You are the nicest faun I've ever met." Oh, you wouldn't say that if you knew," replied Mr. Tumnus between his sobs. "No, I'm a bad faun. I don't suppose there ever was a worse faun since the beginning of the world." "But what have you done?" asked Lucy. "My old father now," said Mr. Tumnus. "That's his picture over on the mantelpiece. He would never have done a thing like this." "A thing like what?" said Lucy. "Like what I've done," said the faun. "Taken service under the White Witch. That's what I am. I am at the pay of the White Witch." "The White Witch? Who is she?" "Why, it is she that has got all of Narnia under her thumb. It's she that makes it always winter and never Christmas. Think of that." "How awful," said Lucy. "But what does she pay you for?" "That's the worst of it," said Mr. Tumnus with a deep groan. I'm a kidnapper for her. That's what I am. Look at me, daughter of Eve. Would you believe that I'm the sort of fawn to meet a poor innocent child in the wood, one that had never done me any harm, and pretended to be friendly with it and invite it home to my cave, all for the sake of lulling it asleep and then handing it over to the White Witch? So now we have a little bit more of a conflict, okay? So we know a little bit more about our problem, okay? No, said Lucy, I'm sure you wouldn't do anything of the sort. But I have, said the fawn. Well, said Lucy, rather slowly, for she wanted to be truthful and yet not to be too hard on him. Well, that was pretty bad, but you're so sorry for it that I'm sure you will you will never do it again. Daughter of Eve, don't you understand, said the fawn. It isn't something I have done. I'm doing it right now, this very moment. What do you mean? Cried Lucy, turning very white. You are the child, said Tumnus. I had orders from the White Witch that if I ever saw a son of Adam or daughter of Eve in the wood, I was to catch them and hand them over to her. And you are the first I ever met, and I pretended to be your friend and asked you to tea, and all of the time I've been meaning to wait till you were asleep and then go and tell her. Oh, but you won't, Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy. You won't, will you? Indeed, you really mustn't. And if I don't, said he, beginning to cry again, she's sure to find out, and she'll have my tail cut off, and my horns sawn off, and my beard plucked out, and she'll wave her wand over my beautiful cloven hooves and turn them into horrid solid hoofs like a wretched horse's. And if she is extra and especially angry, she'll turn me into stone, and I shall be the only statue of a fawn in her horrible house until the 4 thrones at Cair Paravel are filled. And goodness knows when that will happen or whether it will ever happen. Okay, so we have some kind of piece that could break the spell, so to say. That's what he's talking about, the 4 thrones at Cair Paravel. I'm very sorry, Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy, but please let me go home. Of course I will, said the fawn. Of course I've got to. I see that now. I hadn't known what humans were like before I met you. Of course I can't give you up to the witch. Not now that I know you, but we must be off at once. I'll see you back to the lamppost. I suppose you can find your own way from there back to Spare and Wardrobe. I'm sure I can, said Lucy. We must go as quietly as we can, said Mr. Tumnus. The whole wood is full of her spies. Even some of the trees are on her side. They both got up and left the tea things on the table, and Mr. Tumnus once more put up his umbrella and gave Lucy his arm, and they went out into the snow. The journey back was not at all like the journey to the fawn's cave. They stole along as quickly as they could without speaking a word to Mr. Tumnus. And Mr. Tumnus kept to the darkest places. Lucy was relieved when they reached the lamppost again. Do you know your way from here, daughter of Eve, said Tumnus. Lucy looked very hard between the trees and could just see in the distance a patch of light that looked like daylight. Yes, she said, I can see the wardrobe door. Then be off home as quick as you can, said the fawn. And can you ever forgive me for what I meant to do? Why, of course I can, said Lucy, shaking him heartily by the hand. And I do hope you won't get into dreadful trouble on my account. Farewell, daughter of Eve, said he. Perhaps I may keep the handkerchief? Rather, said Lucy, and then ran toward the far-off patch of daylight as quickly as her legs would carry her. And presently, instead of rough branches brushing past her, she felt coats, and instead of crunching snow under her feet, she felt wooden boards. And all at once, she found herself jumping out of the wardrobe into the same empty room from which the whole adventure had started. She shut the wardrobe door tightly behind her and looked around, panting for breath. It was still raining, and she could hear the voices of the others in the passage. I'm here, she shouted. I'm here. I've come back. I'm all right. Okay, so those are the first 2 chapters of our novel. Now, you guys, again, this is the only time that we're going to have 2 chapters in one video. I just needed to get us started so that way we'll be able to finish by the end of the school year. So on tomorrow's agenda, you guys will see comprehension questions for chapters 1 and 2. So the cycle of this, we're going to read the vocabulary first, we'll read a chapter, then we're going to answer the questions, and you guys will be able to submit those, okay? So that's kind of what this is going to look like. Don't forget, we will have our Zoom meetings every Monday from 9:45 till 10:15. I did change the time, so just know that every time I make videos, I will be reminding you guys of all of these things. All right, until next time, bye!